Designing and constructing buildings takes place over many years, with people collaborating together. In the Brick and Wonder podcast, we have conversations with people who work together to realize a collective vision. I spoke with two people whose collaborations evolved into an enduring partnership. Ravi Arps, the founder and principal of Plane, a general contracting company based in New York City and the Hudson Valley, who says that most important in his work are people and his relationships with them.
What is your explicit and implicit commitment to those people? And they all matter equally.
And Michel, the owner of M2 Contracting, a cabinetry and finished carpentry contractor who says the most critical thing to maintain trust among collaborators is owning your mistakes.
If that's the way that that's approached and we're all on the same page about that, everything gets a lot easier.
I'm Drew Lang, the founder of Brick and Wonder. This is the Brick and Wonder podcast. Ravi, Max, welcome to the Brick and Wonder podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Why don't we start by having each of you tell me about your professional backgrounds?
Sure. Max, you want to start?
Sure. I was a general contractor for about 18 years before I transitioned over into the millwork and finished carpentry aspect of this business. I had no professional background before I started my business. It was, to a degree, born out of necessity.
Ravi, how'd you get into this?
So I spent the majority of my career in finance and developed an interest also out of necessity, but also out of something else in construction, and pivoted after doing a project, general contracting a project for my family, into doing the business as my remit in life.
So when did you make the switch? When did that take place from finance to construction?
During COVID. So I would say formally, the company was incorporated first in 2020, and capital was raised, I think, at the tail end of that year for the company. And I gave notice to my business partner in the investment banking firm, I want to say in the spring of 2021.
And how did you two first meet? And also tell me what your first impressions were of each other.
We first met over drinks, I think in Carroll Gardens. I would say the thing that I noticed about Max, he seemed like he had obviously been around the block. He knew what he was talking about. A bit intimidating, but wasn't trying to be. So I think that juxtaposition was interesting to me.
Maybe Max, you can tell us about the first time that you worked together on a project.
I'm not 100% sure which project was the first one we worked on. But basically, when Ravi and I met, the timing just was great because like I said earlier, I was in the midst of making my transition from general contracting into the more architectural millwork and finished carpentry aspect of the business. So I was looking to expand my network and work with like-minded people and in the business. And Ravi, based off my initial impressions, was certainly one of those people. It's just a general thought process and approach that I really liked that we had discussed both the first night that we met, when we met over drinks, and then our secondary meeting that was after that. So it just seemed as though there was a good rapport between the two of us, and we both had the same outlook on the way that these things should be approached and the level at which it should be executed. And usually speaking, you can kind of tell those things very, very quickly within the first few minutes of meeting somebody if they're like-minded. And it just seemed like something that should be explored further, and we did.
Well, the first one where we really got to know each other as partners was a project in Brooklyn. It was about renovation, and you were doing, I believe, both finished carpentry and millwork. Mm-hmm. And beyond that, you also served as a critical path consultant to help us make sure we're thinking through what are the key details on this project that we need to get right in order to deliver both the quality and on a timeline basis. Mm-hmm. So at that point, it was already more than just a typical standard general contractor, subcontractor relationship. both on that project and outside of it. We talked fairly extensively about the industry and how we're going to do different things, putting out products, consulting, because you were always fairly generous with your knowledge and continue to be. So,
yeah, my approach in general, based off of my experience through the years of general contracting before I made that transition, I think it's important that the finish aspects of any project get thought about even in the rough stages. It avoids conflicts between materials and details and makes the finish aspect go a lot smoother. So I worked in that capacity with Ravi, where even in the planning stages, I would try to find certain problem areas where we could figure out details previous to actually things being built, which would avoid scheduling issues and budgetary issues, but also critical path items that were really important to the project, as well as actual sequencing and implementation early on in that process is super, super important at the level at which we work to make sure that these details aren't missed. And that could be something as simple as how two different materials meet, i.e. how does drywall meet wood in this situation, or something as critical as when two doors meet in a corner, the casing profiles and the trim profiles, were they chosen properly so they can actually be melded together? If not, maybe those doors need to be adjusted in the framing stages or they need to be resized. Things of that nature. I worked in that capacity with Ravi, also in the capacity of performing that finished carpentry as well as producing and installing architectural millwork for his projects.
Let's stay on the topic of approach. Ravi, how would you describe your approach to building?
I would say that my approach to building is informed by my approach to business, which is also informed by my approach to life. Not out of being overly principled, but because I just intellectually have a hard time deviating from a path, a good path or a bad path, frankly. And what's most important to me when you approach something is your relationship with the other people involved. What is your explicit and implicit commitment to those people? And they all matter equally. So when it comes to construction, you have subcontractors, you have architects, you have consultants, you have clients, and you have your employees. They're all partners in building something more often than not that is nearly fully custom. And so to a certain extent, you're all on a journey into the unknown together. And if there isn't a commitment to abide by the explicit and implicit commitment you have to those people and doing the best that you can, acting as a fiduciary, acting in good faith, showing up when you say you're going to show up, raising your hand when you make a mistake. If that's not there, then I'm very disinterested in doing the building at all. But once it is there, and I've been fortunate to have found collaborators across the stack that I feel as though operate that way. When it is there, I think the approach then becomes, for me, is about the operation.
Thanks for that. So, talking about craft and achieving excellence, how do you know, Max, when you're in the process of building something, when it's good enough, when arguably you can continue working on things indefinitely?
Well, I think that actually starts, foundationally speaking, Ravi's approach is extremely important because by the time any of that information, whatever is required of me on any given project, be it finished carpentry or millwork, by the time it's given to me by Ravi and his team, a lot of that back-end work has already been done. So at the very least, I have a good starting point for anything, whether it be for design or intent or pricing, where we're already halfway there. As far as when something is good enough, we have a very strict set of minimum standards and tolerances. And that is basically dictated not just by myself, but by my employees as well. My guys have been with me over 15 years. They have full knowledge of what my expectations are. and they really only know how to work in one way within a certain tolerance. And when something isn't right, they don't need to call me or meet with me to ask me if this is good enough. I've never had that phone call because they already know. And if something needs to be redone or rethought or reconfigured, or if it's a design issue where there's something that's coming up which is preventing us from executing a certain thing, then those phone calls will be made. But we do work in tight tolerances. Basically, we understand the level at which we work and the clients that we're working for. And from a pride standpoint of taking pride in our work and the years of work it's taken to acquire this knowledge to be able to execute these things, it's just as important to us that we maintain a certain level of quality and thought that goes into these things. Even if I'm given a full set of drawings that's fully detailed by an architect or a designer where they say, just build this. If there are improvements or things that I think would make the finished product better or more functional, I will certainly say it. That doesn't mean that they have to take what I say, but I'm very vocal about it because inevitably things get missed and I miss things. And sometimes, things get overlooked, which is why it's important to have a collaborative team mentality, because getting a fresh set of eyes on something that someone's been staring at for the past 3 months in the design phase might give some input that's important. But that's the way we approach it. And we certainly have a minimum standard, which is very high, that we want to take pride in what we do and we want to see it in its finished product and be beautiful and have the clients love it. And there's a certain level of satisfaction that we all strive to achieve in that regard.
This podcast is sponsored by Madeira, offering an integrated collection of high-quality wood products. They provide seamless wood design that simplifies wood finish specification. My architecture firm has worked with Madeira on several projects where they provided wood material for flooring, doors, and cabinetry. Their product line and approach created an integrated result and made the process easier, not just for my team, but also for the project contractors and mill workers. I personally recommend Madeira. You can learn more about them at madeirasurfaces.com.
The notion of good enough is a challenging one in the handmade custom services business, because if things were made by machines, you have other machines that can test tolerances, test deviation from some set of plans or model, and it'll tell you based on this standard whether it is good or not, and if it's not good enough, it's rejected and it's redone. But in the world of handmade stuff, which construction, at least in the city, largely still is, and who knows how long that will be, with AI and robotics and whatnot, it becomes a conversation. And you can only have that conversation, at the risk of beating a dead horse, with people that you share values with. Because if you don't have a values alignment, then you could have a client who may not themselves be able to articulate why something isn't good enough, but is saying it is not good enough. And you believe them. You give them the benefit of the doubt. You may have a subcontractor who is saying something is good enough, but you, as the GC, don't believe that it's good enough. And you can all point to a piece of paper where it says, here's the drawings, and it says it needs to look like that, but there's no quantifiable tolerance or quantifiable standard. And so it will either evolve or devolve to a question amongst the people you're partnering with about what good enough means for you at that time.
Well, to add to that, I think that good enough is a relative term to whoever you're speaking to. And I don't think I've ever been asked or said, is that good enough on any project I've ever worked on?
It's something that you talk about, but without utilizing that term good enough.
Correct.
Right?
Correct. Yes. But I think that, like I said, it's really relative to who you're speaking to because everyone's expectations are different. I think even before that conversation happens or before you intricately look at something in detail, I think it goes all the way back to understanding who you're speaking with or who you're working with and managing those expectations from the beginning. Not only yours as the fabricator or provider of these things, but also the clients and what they're looking to get and what their standards are, because that can drastically affect cost, obviously, but also it's not only in the quality of construction, but in the materials that are chosen and the details that are worked out. But it's also a matter of if you're a good fit for that client. Because like I said, when you work within a certain circle of people at a certain level, the standards that you work at, even at a minimum, are substantially higher than most others. And that the cost that's associated with that and the time component that's associated with that might not be a good fit for that client that you're having a conversation with. So I do think that actually starts all the way in the beginning and understanding who you're working with and what their expectations are and whether or not it's a good fit.
What are some of the things that owners and architects overlook in your work, right? What do they not understand, appreciate, and in a sense, what gets in the way, right? Because if there isn't an awareness of, let's say, complexity involved in achieving something that's being asked for, arguably that's a problem.
Yeah, I think there's a disconnect a lot of the time. And again, I'm just going to say as a blanket statement, everything boils down to the conversations and the communication that happens at the beginning of this process, of any process, whether it's building something huge or it's a small project. One of the things that I feel like is overlooked and not understood is understanding what certain details and certain methods of construction do to the cost of anything. For example, if you're going to be building a square vanity, doesn't matter what the materials are necessarily, or even the type of profile you're going to be used. It does matter if you start curving that vanity. Then that creates a whole different animal. And a lot of times there is a misunderstanding or just lack of knowledge, understandably so, that doing things like that make things that much more difficult, which obviously affects cost. The way that Ravi and I always approach these things, which I believe helps these, is in the design phase before anything ever actually gets finalized. Ravi would point those things out and say, just FYI, if you do this in this way, this is going to be relatively expensive. You can achieve the same thing by doing this, which will lower cost, or if that's what you want, that's completely fine. But it's simply a matter of giving that information at the beginning of the process. I think the biggest disconnect is not even necessarily what you're designing as far as the intent of the way you want it to look. It's more so not involving the people, like myself, early in the process to avoid those difficult conversations after an entire house full of millwork is designed to say, hey, all of a sudden we've got $500,000 worth of millwork in this house, and they were not expecting that. A lot of those conversations could have been avoided, or those issues could have been avoided by involving people early on in the process. Even if it's not on a contractual basis, even if it's on simply a consulting basis, just to see, are we going in the right direction? Or is there ways that are we making this unusually expensive or unusually difficult? Things of that nature. And perfect examples are when millwork doesn't go to the ceiling. It's easier to install. You do purposeful reveal and shadow line, sure, but once you have these multiple layer things go up to a ceiling in an 1800s townhouse, well, then there's a lot of scribing to do, and it changes the dynamics of the installation. So there's small details that are throughout these things that could definitely impact cost, especially once you go on a larger scale, like a full house full of millwork. There's one other thing I'd like to add, actually. Understanding the markets and understanding the climate of what's going on in the economy is really important also. The cost of Rift White Oak, for example, today is not what it was 5 years ago. And because of the volatility and all the markets and all these materials, that can change very, very quickly. There are times where white oak would actually be less expensive than cedar and vice versa. Or Ipe might be cheaper than something. The pricing changes so quickly these days. Paint grade is pretty much a standard. That basically never changes as far as those materials, slightly, but within reason, when manageable amounts. And that could be an easy way to make something a little bit more manageable as far as budget without changing the design necessarily of the actual units or the furniture or the cabinetry, but just changing something to paint grade and reserving that stain grade millwork, which is much more difficult to do because you have to be much, much more careful. It needs to be planned much carefully because there is no repairing something when you're doing grain matching or custom laid veneers. So you reserve those for high profile areas like the main kitchen or a big, beautiful built-in in the living room, things like that. And then the secondary millwork in the house and office built-in, things of that nature, you can do paint grade, which will still be beautiful, still done to the exacting tolerances that we do, but it will be more budget friendly.
The analogy that I use, which may or may not be a good one, is if one were to think about how much it would cost to build a car where every component was a decision point in your garage. Because it's not just the challenge of building that thing in a mutable environment, in a non-sanitized environment. It's the cost of the discovery and the figuring out. I think there's a conception through just the exposure on whatever it is, the internet or on television, that there's this fairly easy conduit from ideation to execution, which in some instances it can be, but it often takes much longer to get there than when one might think. And the people that are involved are quite dedicated, quite thoughtful. So I think you have clients who are open to learning. You have clients who already know that. You have clients who are somewhat hands-off and they are trusting. And then you have other types of clients who are not those things. And I think that misconception is a bridge too far for them to get across. And it's unfortunate. But I think a lot of the disconnect comes from that. It's not just a cost thing, it's also a time thing. Just how long is it taking to do the design? How long is it taking to build this thing? And then life goes on and it involves your home. It's something very precious and intimate in many cases, not all. But I think those misconceptions about time and money and expertise and just the overall holistic cost of custom is part of it.
I think that's a blanket term for not just millwork, but custom everything, because everything that you do is custom from, as do you. I mean, everything is, from design to implementation to nothing is just off the shelf. So that's a blanket term for really the entire process at this level of building.
Max, tell me about a time when a collaboration of yours went sideways and what you learned from the experience.
I would say the most important lesson that I have learned in general from the time I got into this business 25 years ago is when to say no. And I think that's a common thing that some people understand and some people don't, and really only comes with trial by fire. With your experience and your knowledge, when you start off in this business, you're hungry, you're driven, you really want to succeed. And sometimes you make concessions to take jobs maybe that you shouldn't, simply to keep the lights on, so to speak, which is typical through any business, really. But sometimes, even in the beginning, it's better to say no because it costs you more than saying yes. And what I mean by that is not going back to people's expectations and understanding who your clients are and the type of work that you're doing. Not everyone is a good fit to work with everyone. And sometimes people are simply unreasonable, as with anything else. And an example I can give you so you understand what I mean by that is way back when I was actually a general contractor, I had a client on a very large renovation. It was a multi-million-dollar renovation. And we went through easily over 50 full-size wall samples of shades of white. No exaggeration. And it was a frustrating process. The client refused to make a decision, kept on asking for more samples. And at some point, I should have just said no. I should have said, when you make that decision, you give it to me. And here are the scheduling implications of what you're doing and how much you're delaying this process. And at some point the following week, this client came back into the project unannounced, walked into the living room and said, this is it. This is the color. I love it. And it ended up being the primer that was on the walls, which everyone thought was quite hilarious. She didn't think it was so funny. But, it kind of is a window when I think about that, how ridiculous that really is. And really, the reason why people in this realm of building and construction work with people like us is so they don't have to make a decision out of a book of 500 samples of anything. They work and collaborate with the people that are like-minded, understand their vision. They go through the process, the team goes through the process and presents 3 options, so to speak, or 4 options, not 500. And those 3 options have been carefully curated by the design team, by everyone involved, based off of their needs and wants and what they'd expressed. And at that point, the decision process is a lot easier. That's why, in my opinion, they hire people at this level so they can go through all of that and come to them with these three or these four, so to speak. And that's the most important thing to me, because then the process is a lot easier. And then you can take one or two or all those samples and modify them slightly, but it becomes a lot faster, a lot easier, and a lot more efficient and a lot less painful. But not everything goes according to plan. None of us are psychics. None of us know what's going to happen. I've always been very upfront with clients about that this is like every single project is almost an experiment, because we don't know what we're going to uncover. We don't know where we're going to land, because everything is kind of this moving animal and we all have to adapt with it. And so long as everyone's on board with that, then there's a clear understanding of it. It can, at that point, a problem comes up or an issue, and it just gets dealt with, and you be proactive about it. And that's the difference between a successful project and one that's not, as far as I'm concerned, even if that's a difficult conversation. And we've had plenty of them, we all have. But much rather be proactive and bring it up and say, let's rip this Band-Aid off. This is the issue we're having, but here's the solution. Because everyone that I've ever worked with, and Ravi included, we're solution-driven people. So even if it's a problem, before we even have these conversations with the team involved or the other people we have to, what are the possible solutions? So when we have that difficult conversation, we have the solutions, and then we can go from there, as opposed to, I'm not really sure, we have to figure out what's going on, which no one likes to leave things open-ended. So things don't always go according to plan, but the way you approach it is important. And I think that's what separates people like Ravi and everybody else, as opposed to just saying, we have a problem, deal with it, figure it out and get back to me. It's everyone's involved in the solution to that problem. And even then, sometimes things go sideways, but we just have to adapt, recalibrate, and move. And that's what we all do constantly, which is what makes this industry, in my estimation, unique in that manner, because it's a constant game of everything moving. Targets move, schedules move, budgets move, unforeseen circumstances come up. And understanding that in general was one of the hardest things for me to wrap my mind around and manage when I first started in this industry. But when you approach it in a certain way, it's doable. You just have to be open to things moving constantly.
How do you build and maintain trust with each other? Right? Because it seems like that is the key, or certainly one of the key ingredients to a successful process and outcome. And this question pertains to the two of you, and it pertains to important relationships with collaborators in general, as you experience them across the industry.
I think the biggest thing, the quality, to me, there's a certain baseline. The quality and execution of the final product, that's a given. That metric doesn't change as far as I'm concerned. So that shouldn't even be involved in whether or not you build trust. I think that's just a baseline that should always be there. The biggest thing for me is owning when you make mistakes. And that can go across anything. If that's the way that that's approached and we're all on the same page about that, everything gets a lot easier. There are going to be times where I go, Ravi, I messed up. I messed up on a schedule. I can't be there this week. You got to give me another 2 weeks. I have to wrap something else up. And everyone needs to pivot. And should that happen every single time? Of course not. But when it does, it's an open conversation. Let's work with me on it. Or Ravi, I messed up on budgeting on this. I under budgeted. Can we have a conversation with the client? Either we can or we can't. Either which way, I own up to my obligations. And the same thing as Ravi to me. If something comes up and he says, Max, listen, I know that you're coming on this day. The site's not ready. We had changes. I wasn't aware. There was a delay. I need you to reschedule for another 2 weeks from now, which, again, it's a matter of pivoting and adapting. So long as that's a mutual understanding between the two people or 3 people or 10 people that are working together, then it's easy, because there's going to be, I think that's how you build the biggest amount of trust. And that's going to happen to all of us. And the way that you deal with it it speaks in volumes of how much respect you have for someone or how much you value that relationship with that trade partner, or even with that person or a friend. And when there is that clear understanding, everything becomes that much easier. And sometimes I need a favor. I need you to do this for me. Well, okay, I'm happy to do that, because there is no tallying that stuff. No one's keeping books on who did what for who. It's simply a matter of, I asked Ravi to do something for me, he did it. He asked me, I do it. And that's the end of it. And it makes the process extremely easy and painless, even when it could be technically painful. So that's my biggest thing.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. What Max is describing to me is integrity and demonstrating personal integrity. And that really can only be demonstrated, in my opinion, when things do not go as planned or as desired. Otherwise, it's just a word. So when something isn't perfect, what does the person do about it? It's that simple. Is it someone else's fault, or is it their own fault? And are they willing to make good on it? And then the other side of that is delivery. I take it very seriously, my commitment to deliver to the people who are paying me, hiring me, recommending me. And I will do almost anything to deliver. And in order to do that, I have to be surrounded by people who also will generally do almost anything to deliver. And so, prior to actually exemplifying that, it's a hope. And I'm working with folks that I trust on the basis of they're saying the right things, they come recommended. But, my antenna is always up, waiting for the delivery and the response to a challenge. That's when I would say that it becomes trust at all. Before that, it's just paper. Someone says they're going to be there at 8:00, even if it's something as small as 8:00 and we're going to meet and it's important and you're not there, or there's no notice, it harms trust massively. And then if something was dropped and is broken and I have to, figure out who did it, and it's just like, look, I have no idea who did it, like literally, but I was the one who was here. And so why don't we partner up on this? Like, that's fine. I'm in a situation like similar to that right now, where it's a neighbor who says something happened to my walls, and it happened before you even started the project. But my relationship is with the client and with you, and we just need to put it to bed. And nobody knows exactly what happened. Pretty sure that we had nothing to do with it, but the commitment is we're a team and we're in this together, and we're going to share the upside of this, and sometimes we're going to have to share the downside of this, because it's amorphous, it's fuzzy. The edges of these things are sometimes fuzzy because it's not factory work. It's this stuff, and I think those are the things that people remember. And so I hopefully, I'm building trust with the client's building trust with me, and that's the currency right there. That's the chip that's traded in when things get tough. That's the call, the repeat call. Repeat calls happen not just from clients to builders or clients to architects. It happens from builders to clients, and architects and tradespeople to clients. We want to work with people that we can trust too, because a bad relationship is very expensive and very painful. And so, I would say those two things: the commitment to delivering and owning and cleaning up your own mess.
This podcast is sponsored by Riley Architectural Windows and Doors. I have personally worked with Riley on several projects, and they've become a go-to partner for me and my architectural firm. Their team is warm, responsive, and technically outstanding, from the ownership to the project managers and through to the fabrication team. They make custom hardwood and metal windows and doors with true artisan-level craft at their shop in Calverton, New York. And they handle everything from design support to installation and maintenance across the United States. I actively seek out new opportunities to collaborate with Riley and look forward to working with their team on many future projects to come.
So, speaking to things that are expensive and painful, Talk to me about a struggle that you've had personally, professionally, be it in your journey, right? With confidence, burnout, communication.
I think a common theme in the trades in general is work-life balance, which you've heard it a lot of times before. It's been discussed numerous times. But that's the biggest thing for me. The way that I had started in this business, I quite literally started it on a whim. Didn't work for someone for 10 years before I decided to go on my own and build that experience and build that network. I just started it. That's all I did from day one. I just started it and I went from there. And there's growing pains with that. And there's some painful process that's involved in that. And inevitably in any small business, in particular in competitive markets like New York City, the hours that you will have to put in strongly will outweigh, at least for certain portions of your career, the amount of time you could spend at home. And it's born out of necessity. It's what's required to stay competitive. Sometimes it's required just to, continue to pay your bills at a bare minimum as you build your business and build your network and build your reputation. That's always been the most difficult thing for me, in particular, with my children, finding the time to spend quality time with them and spend time at home, and instead of constantly chasing a deadline or chasing work or things of that nature. And I think that's been singularly the largest struggle of my career. There are obvious ones that really can be attributed to any business, financial issues or cash flow issues, scheduling issues. Those really can be attributed to any business, not this one specifically. But as far as this specific type of business, a lot of this responsibility to perform and deliver falls solely on the person. Whether it's me or my number two or one of my employees or all of us, it's not falling on a company, so to speak. It falls on a person. You're held directly responsible. And whether that means that I'm getting emails at 10 o'clock at night about something, an issue or a deadline, which I just have to answer, which I try not to do. I've tried to make that change. Or I have to be somewhere on a certain day and at a last minute because there's an issue that came up and it must be addressed now. Otherwise, it's going to throw the whole project off. And a lot of times you just have to pivot and make that meeting happen and change what you're doing. And sometimes, unfortunately, we all play a game of who am I going to disappoint today? We can't be everywhere at once. We're not selling necessarily a commodity or a product. It's more of a process and an experience that we're delivering, because it's not just the thing that we happen to be doing. It's everything else that's attached to it as far as the process is concerned. And the people that need to be involved and the meetings that need to be taken and the drawings that need to be done and the samples that need to be provided and the input that needs to be given. And it's kind of this never ending circle, which to me, the organized chaos of it all is what I actually enjoy. I like to be very busy. I work better under pressure. That's just the way that I'm built. But there are, consequences to that where it can be somewhat detrimental to my personal life, which I've tried to balance, in particular now at my age and this stage of my career, but certainly wasn't the case in the beginning. It was just all work, work, work. And that is one thing that I would have liked to have changed if I could.
What about you, Ravi?
I don't really know how to answer that question, other than to say it's all extremely painful, but it's what I signed up for. It's what I signed up for.
It's a difficult business. It is.
Yeah. And for me, it was an entrepreneurial mission to elevate the construction experience using people and process and not robotics. That was the mission or the vision. I still don't know what the difference is between the two of those things. And I think to even conceive that one could do that requires a bit of myopia, naivete, which are like incredible recipes for just subjecting yourself to pain. To do that, I have learned involves kind of working on everything. It is people, it's processes, technology, it's time, It's figuring out what to do when you're kicked in the teeth. Because when that happened, there's a blow to pride for me, blow to self-esteem, and that affects, how I am when I get home, and how I show up for my family is the most important thing for me in the world. And so I know when my obsession with the mission affects that, and I still can't stop. And so it's a strange thing to put your own hand in a vice and with the other hand turn the crank, because you have no one to blame. You have nowhere to turn. I mean, I've tried, and people are just like, well, don't do that. But you have to.
Well, nothing worth doing is not painful.
Yeah, and in many aspects of my personality are, I'm addicted to that. Like, you don't have to do 100 push-ups. You don't. You'll be fine if you don't. But if it doesn't hurt, to me, I just haven't done anything at all. So that's probably an illness. But the part of that that I think is productive, and the reason that I'm doing this is because I do believe that I'm obsessed with that goal. But I disappoint myself in the process invariably, unpredictably. I disappoint others, and for some of those reasons I understand, and some of them I don't agree with. But not having achieved the thing to me is, just a reminder that I have to keep going. But I like the pain. I like the nature of the challenge because, through it, I've met really incredible people who also are to some extent like that. I would consider both of you to certain degrees like that. There's opportunity cost for your time. You're not run-of-the-mill people. There's other things you could be doing, other challenges you could be taking on in the world, and you're still here. So there's a little bit of a fraternity aspect to that. I think we've made progress and contribution, albeit small, and I think we'll make more. And that's the reward. I've also achieved enough success in my life, both in this industry and in other industries, to know that that feeling of having achieved is quite empty to me. It actually, those are the moments that I find them to be the most emotionally destitute, having achieved the thing. And then you're kind of looking around and like, well, what? I almost hope that I don't figure it all out, because I don't know what I'm going to do. I think I'll fall
You'll
apart.
find another
It'll be a
problem to
mess.
solve. I wouldn't worry about it.
I
Let's talk about what's next. I mean, other than more pain, right? We understand that there's going to be more of that. What's next for each of you, and how do you hope your collaboration with each other evolves?
What's next is scale. Building excellently at scale, both more cheaply and faster than anyone. And I very much want to work with Max on that problem, because he's a problem solver at heart. We've been talking about doors recently, and independently, he started fabricating a prototype for the type of door that we need. Enough said. So want to work with him on that. I think scale will be a means of sort of excising the demons, but also just, I think I've seen enough to know that it can be done at scale. And I'm hyper excited about the next phase. I guess you'd call it, human-based scaled construction, because I think there is a wave of robotics that are coming. I don't know when that's going to come. But in the interim, I think there's a way for people to build more quickly than they do now, with less expertise than has typically been needed to do that in the past. I think it involves elements of design and process and craft and problem solving. And I feel like all of those different ingredients are coming together. And I was literally up till 3 a.m. fantasizing about that last night. So
Ravi doesn't sleep.
Max is definitely involved in that.
As far as future plans, I got into this business. It was by necessity, but also by choice, because I have always enjoyed building things and getting my hands dirty, so to speak. For me to feel like I've accomplished anything, it needs to be somewhat tangible. I have history in building custom cars and always wanted to work with my hands. Tangible nature of these things that I can actually physically touch and feel and fabricate myself is very important to me. It's why I've never been into or even wanted to be anything as far as corporate or a desk job, so to speak. It just doesn't appeal to me. As far as the future, I would still like to maintain the tangible nature of what I do and what I really love, but expand my reach within the same business, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing what that looks like. So last thing I want to do is have each of you pose a question that you would like answered by other people in our industry.
Well, for me, from where I sit with what I do, I think what I would really like to understand is where in the decision-making process does the value of something that's actually custom built get taken into consideration, as opposed to just the zeros and ones of it all. And what I mean by that is basically, hypothetically, a client goes and gets pricing from 3 different mill workers, and they're 3 completely different types of mill workers. And the range is wild as far as from the least expensive to the most expensive. Where in that process does the value of a full custom build, in any sense, whether it's a full house or just a vanity, get the value it deserves?
Where in the process, and I suppose by extension, it's a how question. Also, like
it definitely is. It definitely is. It's
how do things get valued?
How do things get valued? Like where is that equation in the process where in the planning phase or the design phase does the client or the designer or the architect say this should absolutely be custom, and you need to understand the implications of that as far as time and cost is concerned, versus, oh, you can value engineer this and do this for much less expensive, it's not that important. Where in the process does that get decided? And more importantly, how does the cost of something that's full custom get justified to someone who's doesn't have intimate knowledge of the business and what they're getting into?
Ravi?
I would like honest reflection from each constituent class in the industry about what they're each doing wrong and what would they do differently. Because my sense is that they're all doing something wrong. Because there's a massive disconnect from each constituent about the value of the other. And I don't know whether that intention is good. My instinct is that it is bad.
Okay, let's leave it there. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was Ravi Arps, the founder and principal of Plane, a general contracting company based in New York City and the Hudson Valley, and Max Michel, the owner of M2 Contracting, a cabinetry and finished carpentry contractor. Max and Ravi are currently working together on several projects, and they are teaming up to develop a series of construction products. Thanks so much for joining us. If this episode resonated with you, the best way to support the show is to share it with a friend or colleague, someone you think would appreciate this conversation as much as you do. And if you haven't already, please take a moment to rate and review Working Together on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It really helps new listeners find the show, and it means a lot to us. Thanks for being part of the conversation, and until next time, keep building, keep questioning, and keep working together. The Working Together podcast is produced by the team at Radio Kismet, including Christopher Plant and Justin Berger. The production and editing staff also included Brick and Wonder team members Ed Thompson, Carrie Potter, and Roya Osuli. I'm Drew Lang, and you've been listening to the Brick and Wonder podcast.